Hello, and welcome to Season 13, Episode 11 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
Mark Bishop.
This is, of course, the season finale of this season. We are finishing up Plato's Republic, this time discussing Book 10, in which he kind of, almost as an appendix, it seems, sort of attached on later is what the editor seems to say about this section, kind of returning to that idea of art. What makes art good? Is art sort of deceitful and things like that in this last section? Sort of returning back to that conversation that we heard earlier in earlier books of the Republic.
This is the
Um,
penultimate
no,
episode.
it's the
Oh,
ultimate episode. It's the final episode.
no, penultimate means it's one more superior than the ultimate.
No, it's
Penultimate.
almost like
Oh,
the word peninsula. That's from the Latin pen plus insula, insula meaning island. So it's almost an island. It's attached only on one side.
interesting.
Yeah,
A
there you go.
little word guy action.
Yeah, you're
Uh,
welcome.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. What'd you
Mhm.
think of this section, this conclusion to the Republic?
I was glad it's over.
Well, I kind of figured that would be your answer.
Did you read the last thing? It's not. I don't know. Yeah, the theory of art, and then there's like the other section. I read that one too.
The appendix,
Immortality. Part
or
11, the immortality of the soul and the rewards of goodness.
yes, so that's just part of book 10. That's just the edition we have splits them up into two sections.
Okay,
So yeah, I read through all of that
good.
about the immortality of the soul here at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it was fine as far as it goes.
Right.
It's that I guess we'll get to it in a minute, but just that like I guess his real theory is art imitates life and it's not real.
Hmm.
What God, or as he would say, the gods create, um, and so it's almost dishonest
Right.
in its own way. It's not true.
Right.
Um, and I'm not convinced by that
Hmm.
argument. And I'm
Yeah.
not a big artsy fartsy guy, but I think there's truth and beauty in art that in some ways is more real
Hmm.
than what they depict. If that makes
Mm.
sense. Like he talks about, maybe you just get into it, but he talks
Yeah.
about how like a carpenter can make a bed, for example, or like a dresser or a table. Let's just say a table. So a
Right.
carpenter can make a table, and so the form or the idea of a table is, I guess, created by God.
Hmm.
It's the concept of a
Right.
table, and that's the most real.
Hmm.
And then the carpenter is making an approximation or an example, which of that table when
Hmm.
he the table, and then an artist would paint it, paint a picture of a table, so it's like three times removed from what
Right.
was real.
Right.
And I just don't follow that. I don't find it convincing because like if you have an artistic depiction of a table, depending on what it is,
Hmm.
it can be more closer to the concept of table than the actual physical table. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense, and
Yeah.
that's sort of a Tolkien point there. I know I've talked about we read his On Fairy Stories, where he's talking about the maddest castle that ever jumped out of a giant's bag, and the wildest Gaelic stories in some ways, more real, not only much less ugly, but much more real than like the electric street lamp or the roof of a train station and things like that. Like these are real physical things, but there's something about art. And participating in this sort of act of creation that makes something more real. And I read that as him saying, well, it makes us more like, participating in our image of God and things like that. It makes us closer to something a little bit more divine and things like that. But
Yes.
that's sort of tangential to Plato, I guess, because that's not where Tolkien's coming from. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion.
Well, and I was really stealing his ideas and your articulation of his ideas,
Hmm.
what I was saying earlier. So
Yep.
I don't want to act like I was coming up with that as original thought completely. But then I think I also disagree that the carpenter making the table, that table is less real than the theoretical table.
Hmm.
I view it completely the opposite. That the conceptual theory of what a table is less real than the actual, and is
Yeah.
less reliable or less truthful. Like 'cause that's really what he's getting at. What is the truth?
Hmm.
And like you say, well, like a perfect triangle or a perfect circle. A perfect circle doesn't. There's a band, I think, it's a Perfect Circle from the 80s,
Hmm.
90s. Anyway, so that that's in theory something that can exist, but you can never make a perfect circle.
Right.
Um, and so I get that
Hmm.
in a sense, um, but I'm such an advocate of practical knowledge that just knowing what the concept is doesn't get you anywhere. You
Right.
have to be able to replicate it and actually have it affect you and in the world. I think
Right.
for
Yeah.
it to be true.
Yeah,
But
I'm definitely not a Platonist in this regard. I don't believe that there are these, eternal forms and things like that existing out there somewhere. But let's get into to what he says about all
wait a
this.
second. Wait a second.
Yes.
You really don't? I mean, I think there
No.
are conceptual ideas.
Yes. But Plato's thought is that they physically exist
Oh yeah,
somewhere. Yes,
yes,
and
right.
then that's wrong. And I take the more Aristotelian idea, which is like, well, we do have these concepts and these ideas that there is something to which we're comparing these things to, but it's not like those ideas physically exist out there in heaven or something in the heavenly spheres and stuff like that, which is sort of Plato's idea. But I, mean, I believe
I want to mention to our audience that you are like waving your hand above your head as if you're the things in
I'm
that.
pointing to the heavenly spheres
You're
up there.
waving
Yeah, yeah,
your right hand above your head
yes,
in a circular motion, like
yes.
the hailing a taxi in the 1930s.
Yes.
The
But I
point.
do agree, like the craftsman making a table, the carpenter making a table, he has an idea, he has a concept of a table in his mind, right? And that's part of what's, making him make that table. He has an idea of what a table should be, right? He has sort of that idea, that form in his mind. And I'm still waving my hand around like an idiot. But yeah, he does have that idea that is real in some ways, but not real in sort of the sense that Plato talks about it.
Yes.
Yes. Well, let's get into what Plato says. And I think that the editor makes a really good point here at the very beginning, talking about like the Greek word that Plato's using, mimesis, right? Which is related to our word, to mime, right? Like a mime. And he says, well, this is really sort of extended now into his description of all art. Mimesis really just means representation, right? And so we're talking about art. He's really treating it as a representation of something else, which I think to an
Yes.
extent is true. You're always representing something when you're making art. But he is really focusing on, well, what is it representing? What sort of reality does it have? And why do sort of artists do what they do? Um, and he
Yeah.
says,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead. No, no, go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, like he does and I'm not a big fan of like modern conceptual art,
Hmm.
but there are some that are fascinating. Well, like Picasso's kind of interesting, or so I like Salvador Dali's
Hmm.
stuff, some of his stuff. That are not real. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know enough about ancient Greece to know. I assume that their art would be painting of landscapes and
Hmm.
people.
Right,
And trying to have an approximation of the reality as opposed to some sort of concept or alternative
right,
thought or take on it.
right,
Um, so I don't think he's addressing that idea, that
right,
concept of artistic creativity that's not just representative
right.
of the physical world.
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean, at least in the surviving Greek art that we do have, it is very, to use that word like mimetic, it's very representational, right? You think about like the Greek, vases, the amphora, right? They're depictions of human figures and animals, and the surviving mosaics that we have. It's all very much like things that exist, right? Sometimes it's depictions of the gods, which, of course, don't actually exist. They wouldn't have seen these things happening, but it's using human figures and these things that they would have seen. And so they're not, completely abstract, designs as far as we know. But yeah, that's what he says, and he sort of begins. He's talking about, well, how do you know if it's truly representing something else? And he says, well, the quickest way to represent something is to take a mirror and turn it around in all directions. Before long, you will create sun and stars and earth, yourself and all other animals and plants and furniture and the other objects we mentioned just now. Right, that's on page 337 for us, section 596E. But he says, then his interlocutor says, well, yes, they would only be reflections, not real things. And that's really sort of the crux of his argument, it seems here. He says, well, then the painter is doing the same thing, right? They're
Yes.
just sort of, and it's not even as realistic as a mirror is, right? They're using sort of material things to make representations similar to the way that a mirror reflects something. And it's just a reflection of something else and not a real thing in and of itself. It just resembles something without being that thing.
Yes, and then he goes on from there, and he talks about like a carpenter making something,
Hmm.
which is different than just a painter making an image of it. But he says on the next page, 338, says,
Hmm.
so we shan't be surprised if the bed the carpenter makes is a shadowy thing compared to reality.
Hmm.
Because he has a question, and was it Glaucon that he's talking to? He says, no. It's like, well, wait a second. Who thinks that the bed is a shadowy thing compared to reality?
Yeah.
I mean, common sense tells you the bed's the reality.
Hmm.
The physical bed, it's the shadowy concept of a bed.
Right.
That and what do you really mean by a bed?
Hmm.
In theory, well, it could be a whole lot of different things,
Right.
uh, as opposed to this thing that I'm going to sleep on tonight.
Hmm.
That's a bed. Everything else is just talk.
Right.
That's part of my criticism of Plato is
Hmm.
it's a lot of theory
Right. And it really
and
goes back to his whole allegory of the cave too, that we were talking about in the previous books, that it's like, well, really, as we're down here in the cave, right, really any physical bed is just sort of those shadows on the wall. For us to really understand the true bed, we have to get out of the cave and look at the sun, and look at, sort of the forms of things, the ideas of things that actually exist out there, and that's the truer reality. I think all of this is very, very much related to the allegory we saw earlier.
Yeah, and I think that's true up until you're hungry and there's a ham sandwich, because the ham sandwich is either there or it's not, and it's real. And it's like, wait a second, I'm really hungry, and here's a ham sandwich. This is this is real. I'm not I'm not confused because I'm in the cave. Uh, I can tell this is a darn good sandwich. Uh, anyway,
Right. He makes a little bit of a different argument then, but very much related on page 339, where he's talking about section like 598b. But he says, like, if you look at a bed, right, no matter which angle you're looking at it from, it's going to look different, but it still stays the same thing. And then he sort of raises the question, well, the artist is only painting one representation, right? And he's relying on what he says. He says, when the painter makes his representation, does he do so by reference to the object as it actually is or to its superficial appearance? Is his representation one of an apparition or of the truth? And so that's also what he's talking about here, is that you can really only rely when you're making an artistic representation on sort of the physical qualities of the thing. You can never really paint like, to use, I guess, sort of the more Aristotelian terms, like the formal cause. You can never paint like what a bed is for. You can just paint what a bed looks like. But I do agree with you, Senator. Going back to the other point, you can emphasize different parts of the bed to like get to the idea of, well, what is this bed being used for in this scene that I'm painting? How can I accentuate sort of its bedness, for lack of a different word? And I think those are things you can get across in art. He's saying, well, you can really only paint the representation, the surface appearance of the thing.
yeah, and I think what you're getting at is absolutely correct, because like I can just envision like three different paintings of beds that
Hmm.
are convey a different concept. One would be the classic race car kid's bed, like a Lightning McQueen kid's bed in a bedroom in Middle America,
Hmm.
and everybody like you've already pictured it. You
Hmm.
can see that in your mind.
Right.
And then another one is like a big, comfy, cozy, like bed and breakfast bed, that you just want to snuggle up in the quilts, and it has a bunch of big fluffy pillows. Or you can have like a view of the bed, almost like from the floor, and it's like a spooky bed, like there's
Mm.
something under there. Like
Hmm.
maybe you see some eyes looking out. I mean, that's an artist's depiction of a bed, but you're conveying almost a short story
Right.
just by one image. And I think it completely ignores that concept where
Hmm.
you can have a communication and a creativity from a painting that you can't have, and you can't communicate from this theoretical form bed, which to me is antiseptic, and just in theory, like the perfect triangle, or a circle or something. That's not, in some ways that's not as real as the painting, because
Hmm.
the painting actually shows what it is and what type, and conveys the concept, and communicates it,
Hmm.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I think that's a great point.
Big
And then we get
defender of the arts. You
yes.
probably weren't aware of that, but I
Yeah, yeah.
actually am.
Oh, that's good. That's very good.
I just don't like commie art. Actually, some communist art was really interesting.
Hmm.
Like in the communist propaganda posters. Jordan Peterson is famously a big fan of them.
Yeah.
He,
Well, I mean,
he
it's
had
it's
dozens and dozens of them in his house,
mhm,
like
yeah.
almost like wallpaper.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, right? They knew that art can be for something and convey ideas, sometimes more clearly. And if you use art in that way, right? And that's why it becomes propaganda because you're conveying something in such a dramatic way and you really can feel the emotion behind it and things like that. And it's a very striking thing for sure.
Yeah. Or the lack of
Um,
emotion.
right.
Like
Yeah.
you're a machine or part of the machine or something.
Right. Exactly.
Communism.
Um, he gets into a little bit more kind of, I think the reason he is so critical of art when he's talking about Homer, on pages,
Yes.
340 and 341 for us, because he really, the problem that he's attacking with the Greeks is they treated Homer, in the Iliad and the Odyssey almost like scripture,
Mhm.
as we would treat it, not just for religious sense, but that he is sort of the guide for everybody. Right, because he's the guide for craftsmen, because there are craftsmen that appear in these epic poems, and so you should be like the people in the Iliad. He says, well, he's not doing a good job at representing everything that you should be, right? Because he has this whole theory of art, representation getting farther and farther away from the reality of the thing. But I think even just on a more practical point, he can't have mastered every single skill, right? And so you shouldn't use him as a guideline for every single skill, and you shouldn't use tragedians and poets and things like that as examples for every single component of your life. They can represent some things quite well, but they can't capture everything. They cannot be guides to it all. And I think that's more of the problem that he seems to be focusing on, for his time period here.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with them about poets.
You
His
don't like
criticism
poets?
of poet. I'm trying. I'm
Hmm.
trying to like poetry.
Hmm.
Um, and it's yeah. I'm just such a literal dude. I'd
Yeah.
rather you say it,
Hmm.
but a really good poem. Like like I've even mentioned what's his name? You met him. We had him on as a guest on a podcast. Had a really
Austin Freeman.
Austin Freeman. He's a really I thought a really good writer.
Hmm.
Like just the way he said stuff and the way he articulated it. I'm not saying that was poetry because it was prose, but um, so I'm not denigrating all poetry, but I have a hard time because you have to spend so much time
Right.
and you read it and you let it sit, or
Hmm.
simmer. And that's just not my way.
Yeah. Have I ever made you read Tolkien's poem Mythopoeia?
No, you have not accomplished that feat.
You should read it. It's really good. It
How long
relates.
is it? Like 500 pages?
No, it's like 6 pages,
Tolkien.
but like one column on each page, right? It's a pretty, it's like a decent length poem, but it's not crazy long. But it's very much related to the essay on fairy stories. It's kind of making his conversation with C.S. Lewis, in which he convinced him, of the truth of Christianity, talking about, how we make myths because we're made in the image and likeness of a creator and things like that. It's very good because it's sort of a dialogue between two people, myth lover and myth hater. And the myth hater is saying, well, everything's just atoms bouncing around, and a star's just a star, just matter in a ball. And the myth lover is saying, well, no, I'll keep my poetic sense, my myth making sense. I'm not going to throw my golden crown down. I will not bow before the iron crown. I will not throw my golden scepter down, et cetera, et cetera. It's really good. It's I think his one of his best poems.
Someday.
I also have all three volumes of the collected poems of J.R.R. Tolkien. If you want to borrow them.
I don't think I can. That's a lot to it's a lot to bite off of. I don't think I can.
Um, so we have then his critique of art, more or less, right? We can talk a
Yes.
little bit more about Homer, but we don't really need to. But then he
Yeah.
talks about, well, what is the appeal of art and poetry? And this is sort of just another wing of this, right? Where he says it's really just sort of appealing to something other than our desire for the truth. Right, it's
Yeah.
appealing for our desire for beauty and things like that, and to draw emotions out of us. And in this, he seems like he seems to be saying, right, this is drawing us away from the truth in some way by making us, feel these things and making us be appealed to these certain things. You're not getting to that higher knowledge, that wisdom that we've talked about in the previous sections of the book. Right, he says it's kind of distracting you from the truer things. And it does a really good job at appealing to sort of those lower ideas, those lower forms of knowledge in some way.
Yeah, and I may surprise you with this advocacy. I tend to agree with him in a lot of respects, but I think um, there is something to be said for, oh God, I can't even say this, emotional truth. Like
Oh no.
you know that there is, well, I have this opinion that opinions can be wrong. Like if you
Yes.
say there can be something beautiful and that is true.
Hmm.
That there's true beauty, physical beauty. There are paintings, there's artwork, there's sculptures, and it doesn't have to be just beautiful representations of what exists, um, or some practical use. So I think I don't think it's, and he's saying, well, we'll ban poets, we'll
Hmm.
ban these kind of false arts that are not just logic and reason.
Right.
And even though I'm, kind of generally a fan, like especially if you're debating concepts, I don't want to hear about how you feel about it, like the
Right.
whole facts don't care about your feelings, argument. But there is something about art which isn't just, it's not just emotional.
Hmm.
That there are concepts of beauty and love that he never really addresses in any of this. Like he has this mechanical view of the perfect society
Right.
that he never addresses love. Did you notice
Hmm.
that? I mean, not really, because he wants to break up families. He wants to have communal wives and communal children,
Right.
and
Right.
this whole logic and reason. And we're gonna manufacture these guardians, and they're gonna be leaders because they won't know anything different because we're gonna brainwash them. And it's so antiseptic that it is repulsive to me.
Hmm.
And I think he misses. He doesn't. And I'm sure he's smart enough to know that these benefits exist and that these are issues with whatever his theories are or were. But he doesn't acknowledge them or address them appropriately in these discussions. I think
Right.
he just completely says, nope, that's not important, and so we don't need it. And
Right.
it's not going to be in our perfect society, right?
Right.
Which he only acknowledges at the end that it can never happen.
Right.
So
Yeah, and I think it's very true that, there is a lot of reason to really appreciate art, right? It's not just like you were saying, it's not just the will and the passions, which he seems to say, right? The poet just excites the will and the passions to the detriment of the reason. Those paintings that you really like in the St. Louis Art Museum,
mhm.
that the American painter, I'm forgetting his name, but like of the people voting. What's
Is it George Cal Bingham? Is that who
Yeah,
I'm
I
thinking?
think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's the Missouri painter that generally has them in a triangle,
Yes.
like a pyramid shape. Focus
Yeah.
your attention.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's not my favorite style of art, just that sort of painting style. But like the more you talked about them, the triangle and all the things that are happening in the background, right? Even if I'm not immediately thinking about those things, then when I see that painting, having understood more about it, like it seems more beautiful, just like instinctively,
yeah.
just having
Right.
known that I know things about it, right? And so like the reason's very much involved, and like the reason, in effect, the will and the passions, to use Plato's
Yeah,
terms here, where it's like, well, if I know more about it, I can be more affected by it because I can better appreciate the art that it is.
yeah. And well, I have artwork in my office. I have two
Yeah.
pieces of art on my wall. One is a framed print of the famous freedom of speech painting by Norman Rockwell,
Hmm.
and it's a reminder of the value for the citizen in a republic. Because this guy's, you can tell he's at like a town hall meeting,
Hmm.
and he's a working class guy. His hands are rough. I mean, the detail is fantastic, and he's obviously doing like a public comment in the middle of the meeting, and it's probably set in a church because they're in pews, and you can see his hands, and he's kind of looking up towards the what's probably the dais or the altar or wherever the meeting is being, and he's saying something, and people are listening to him, and it's public comments at my city meetings that I've gone to, I don't know, thousands now, are not always inspirational, but they're not always a waste of time, and they're
Hmm.
they're quite often very useful. And I just think it's just a beautiful representation of a citizen in a republic in the United States. And then the other one is from my album Propaganda, which is Chairman Mao playing the guitar for adoring fans.
Yeah.
Which I just think is just I don't I every t- you know, I look at it at least once a day, and
Hmm.
it never fails to put a smile on my face. I can't say why I think it's so funny. It's so
I mean,
just
it's
amusing.
absolutely ridiculous.
It's so absurd. And I feel like I should be more what do you say, thoughtful about it, or more inspired, or intellectually curious about the concept of it. But it's just
Hmm.
so silly. I just love it.
Oh,
Anyway,
that's great.
a little slice of Mark Bishop's appreciation for art.
Well,
Yeah,
there you go.
I am kind of like a connoisseur of art. I'm gonna pat myself on the back. How many other people have artwork on their walls?
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Not just a landscape. I don't have any landscapes. I can look out the window. Yeah, I'm proud of myself.
Well, there you go. I think that about wraps up his section on his theory of art here. I mean, he again talks about sort of the effects of it, on the soul. Again, we kind of already mentioned that, and that it's sort of detrimental because it's distracting you from the more true things. But then the last section of the work here is on the immortality of the soul, and then he kind of wraps up again by talking about the rewards of goodness.
Yeah.
So again, that idea, it's not just inherently better to be good, but there are some rewards to being a good person, right? So they're even making an even stronger argument than he was making earlier. But
Yes.
first, he talks about how the soul is immortal, right? And this is where he's really getting very metaphysical on us, where he says, well, there's certain things that are sort of the vices to each particular thing, right? Well, what destroys metal? Well, rust destroys metal. And he says, that's the particular flaw to metal is rusting and deteriorating and things like that. And he sort of asks the question, what is sort of the flaw of the soul, right? If the soul is pursuing reason and virtue and things like that, well, then of course it's sort of moral wickedness. Well, that is the thing that is the vice of the soul. But he makes the point, well, moral wickedness, right, can't actually destroy anything, right? If that is a particular vice of the soul, then the soul necessarily has to be immortal because there's no corresponding vice that is destructive of a thing. Right? He says, well, disease is sort of the vice of the body, and that is what makes people die, is they get diseased and they die. But moral wickedness does not destroy the soul, so the soul has to be immortal, which is an
Yeah.
interesting argument.
Yeah. What do you think of that argument?
It's not great, and I think it's because he has a different idea of the soul than we do. Again, this is very much, I think, sort of related to the forms. This gets into his like theory of knowledge, that the reason that we can know what a circle is because our soul pre-existed our body, and it was up there in the heavenly spheres. I'm waving my hand around again, and so it saw or it experienced like the perfect circle in this heaven or before heaven, this divine area. And then when we see circles, when the soul is joined to the body in some way, I don't know if he ever really describes how exactly that works, then really we're just remembering what the perfect circle is because we experienced it before the soul was in the body. And that's why we can know what a circle is. It's this idea of memory and things like that, which it just isn't true. Aristotle's take is much better, as it always is, where he acknowledges, right, the soul is sort of the form of the body, right? A soul is unique to one particular person. This is the Christian belief as well, is that the soul does not pre-exist the body in some way, right? At the moment of conception, right, it's body and soul that are together, that are united there. But the soul can exist after the death of the body because there's an element of humanity that is immaterial. There's incorporeal, right? Our intellect is this incorporeal thing, that's this faculty of the soul. And so that can exist after the body because it's not corporeal necessarily. That's the idea of, souls in heaven and things like that. But it's Plato doesn't seem to recognize, right, the necessity of the soul and the body being one.
Mm.
Right, this is sort of where this floating soul that then sort of participates in a body for some time and then maybe returns to some other soul form, I don't know, after death, which isn't sort of the Christian view of things.
Yeah, I think thank you for that. I think I could be convinced that, or no, maybe I couldn't be convinced. But anyway, I think there's a rational argument that Plato is 100% wrong on this, that you
Hmm.
can have illness of a soul, just like you have illness of the body.
Yeah,
If you're doing wicked things, how is he doesn't disprove that you could cause damage to that soul that
right.
has existed. And I think um, just intuitively, I haven't really thought it out, but I really do think that when you, I mean, I think the concept is when you sin, you're damaging your relationship with God, and that you feel it in your soul. But I get I have this sense that truly evil people that have done really evil things, kind of like um, the Harry Potter story of the Horcruxes. Like you
Mm,
commit murder, you split your soul. I think there's some concept to that, that you really are, you've damaged your soul, your
yeah.
being, when you do some things that are so horrible. And I think it can be I think everybody can be redeemed to a point. Of course, if God redeems you, it's prerogative, obviously. So, I've thought about that a lot, especially in my field. You meet a lot of really bad people, and some of them are criminals, and others are attorneys or judges or whatever. I'm just joking, of course. But so you meet a lot of people that have done really bad things,
hmm
and but then you meet people who've done bad things, and they just seem delightful.
Yeah.
Oddly,
Mm,
like some of the nicest defendants I interacted with are were killers,
mm.
but for various reasons. But um, anyway,
Yeah.
what are
Well, I
your, what are
mean,
your thoughts on that?
that's kind of similar to something St. Augustine talks about. And he was very much sort of in a more Platonic worldview. Of course, he kind of had Christian corrections in there. I think I might have brought this up before, but that's a point that he makes, right? If God is, the fullness of being, right? And by, your prayer and, doing, good works and things like that and practicing virtue that brings us closer to God, well, then what's the alternative, right? If we're sinning, we're going farther away from God, right? And if we're doing good, right, we're becoming more like God, we're becoming more like being, we're becoming more being. If we're doing evil, right, we're just becoming more nothing, right? We're becoming
Yeah,
less in some
right.
way. We're being separated from being itself. And so we are, I think in some ways, right, we're becoming less. We're becoming less being, right? And I think that does kind of hold up. I would agree with that.
And I think like where people say, if they really become depraved, they have a sense that they were like almost animalistic.
Mm,
Like you'll see if you have interviews with people, and I'm not saying that they're evil,
mhm,
necessarily, but you see interviews with people who are really torn up with addiction, and they're
mm,
doing horrible things during addiction, and they have a sense they felt like they were just animals,
mm,
just with this insatiable hunger for the drug, and it would do anything to get it. And so that's kind of like the concept I'm thinking of, and
yeah,
not saying that addicts are soulless people or evil
right.
even really. I
Mm.
mean, some ways they lose that at some point. In some respects, they lose a certain aspect of free will, I think.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well,
Uh,
that's like the standard sort of like argument against or argument for why drunkenness is a sin is that
mm,
well it's not just because it's bad and you might do bad things, right? It's because you're like inhibiting your reason, right?
mm,
That we are supposed to use our reason things and reason how to pursue God and pursue goodness, and if you're willingly going beyond that point, then you're sort of weakening part of what makes you human, right?
yeah,
If we're made human by our intellect and our free will, you're sort of inhibiting both of those things. If you're drinking too much or doing X, Y, or Z drug, right? You're inhibiting your intellect and your free will. You're harming what makes you human.
yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
Thank you. I don't know how much more we want to talk about the immortality of the soul. I think that kind of covers, our thoughts on Plato there. But then he does say that there are sort of material rewards for goodness in this life, right? It's not just that, goodness is good in sort of an abstract sense, which he's also saying, right? It is just good to
Yeah.
be good. But he says, the good man, right? We'll have some rewards here, right? That he will be, sort of granted these rewards of justice, right? If he's a truly just person, right? People will in some way recognize that, right? He shouldn't pursue that recognition. That would in some ways make him less just. But when people will recognize that, they'll be given to the possessor of judgment. Um, right. Let me see if the quote that I'm looking for here. Um,
While you're looking for the quote, it kind of reminds me like when people say, "Well, karma's a bitch."
yeah.
Like eventually it'll catch up with that guy or that
Right.
gal. And I think we all recognize that, if you are dishonest and if you are a bad person, It may help you along for a little while, but it's
Hmm.
it's probably not going to last forever, and you're going to find yourself in an unhappy place, no matter if you're materially successful or not. And that's really, if you watch any like biography of some celebrity,
Hmm.
it's almost universal how lost they are with the success. Except for some very rare people that are celebrities in America that maintain their marriage and have a happy family life. There's so
Hmm.
many of that. I mean, like how many celebrities have committed suicide in my
Yeah.
lifetime that were at the top of their world and top of their game, and it wasn't just drug related. It was they were just so sad and so lonely,
Right.
uh, even with all that success. And so I think his argument is in part like if you live a good life, you're more likely to have a good spouse and a good family and a happy day to day
Right.
life and the things that you do on a normal basis because people will trust you and people will like you. But if you're stealing from everybody and you may be able to get over on people, but eventually it's going to catch up.
Right. Yeah, this is the analogy he uses. This is on page 360 for us, section 614 or 613C. He says, and what about men? If the truth be told, isn't it this, that the clever rogue is like a runner who does well over the first half of the course, but then flags? He is very quick off the mark, but in the end is humiliated and runs off with his tail between his legs without any prize. The real runner stays the course and carries off the prize in triumph. Isn't the same thing true in general of the just man? In any action in dealings with others or in life itself, isn't he the man who in the end gets both the rewards and the good name among his fellows? Right, if you
Mhm.
treat others with justice, right, in some ways the rewards will come to you, right? Maybe not in the very short term. In the long run, you build up this reputation. People like you. People want to be around you. People want to help you out. Very practical argument there here
Yep.
at the very end. And I
Right.
think it's true.
Yep. And I was just thinking as you're reading that, it reminds me of the story of the tortoise and the
Right.
hare. And then, you think about all the Aesop's fables, and some of them are pretty brutal. But we ought to have that as mandate. I don't know if that's still taught like
Yeah.
to kids. And there's so much wisdom. Like the one that I keep coming back to recently is the frog and the scorpion.
I don't know if I know that
You
one
know,
off the top of my head.
oh, you have to know that one. It's so the there's a scorpion on the side of a river,
Hmm.
and and he says to the frog,
Oh, I do know this one. Yeah, yeah.
"Give me a lift across. Let me climb on your back and give me a ride over the other side of the river." And he said, I dare scorpion, sting me." And so the scorpion says, "Well, I'm not gonna sting you, and we'll both drown."
Hmm.
And they get halfway across, and he stings him. And the frog says, "Why'd you do that? We're both gonna die." He says, "Because I'm a scorpion.
Yeah.
What I do." And I think that is such a lesson in human nature. Be careful the people that have shown themselves to be a certain way. Don't be surprised if they are that certain way.
Right.
What's the saying the young people say? If someone tells you who they are, believe them.
Mm.
Somebody tells you if they say what kind of person they are, believe them.
Yeah.
And because a lot of people will announce it to the world.
Right. Well, speaking of
Yeah.
fables, no, that was a good thought. Speaking of fables, he ends with a myth, right? Which is interesting. I know we talked about this before, right? He inveighs against myths, and then he says we need to set up these myths, and then he ends the
Yeah.
whole book
With a
talking about
myth.
this myth of right? And it's this really interesting, discussion of the afterlife, essentially this system of reincarnation. It seems, right? Talking about the soul being immortal and stuff like that. And essentially, what he says, I won't read out huge sections of this 'cause it's pretty long. But he says this man named dies in battle. And after he dies, right, there's these judges who judge that the just people to take this right hand road that leads up to the sky, and the unjust to go this left hand road to lead downwards. And he essentially says, like, everybody who dies gets to pick like a new soul for their next life. And essentially, you have all the wisdom that you've gained in your own life, right? You're not any smarter when you're in this sort of afterlife scenario. And he says, what the unjust people are gonna do is they're gonna choose to be the tyrant, right? They're going to want to, they say, oh, well, this person, has this power right here, but then they don't see the full person's life, right? They pick the tyrant's life, seeing that he has this wealth, this power for this time, forgetting or not seeing fully that he is going to die a horrible death in some way, that he's going to end, penniless and poor and things like that. Well, the just man, is going to choose the just life again, right? That having this wisdom, and he essentially says, well, that's the eternal reward, right? If you live a just life now, you'll sort of train yourself. You'll have this knowledge of what justice is, that you'll be able to pick the better part for the next go round. And he says there's also the discussion there of sort of the people in between. Some of them just become like cattle and things like that just pick an animal life because they don't want to deal with humanity, in the next go around. And I don't know how that works in his whole system. Do the animal souls also get to pick again? And does a cow get to become a tyrant at some point in the future? I don't know how that works. But it's kind of trying to put things in this eternal perspective, giving us the practical wisdom, and then this sort of weird myth of about sort of the eternal reward that you get if you're a just person to get to choose the just life again next go around.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about that?
About the myth of Ur,
Yes.
I just thought it was goofy.
Yeah, it was a little goofy.
Sorry, I didn't, I read it.
Yeah.
And it was, this guy, the story is a guy died and then came back and then told, okay, this is what the afterlife's about,
Right. Right.
um, and sharing it with everybody. I don't know. I just
Yeah.
didn't know what to make heads or tails of it. I thought,
Yeah.
is
It's
this
an
just,
odd way to end.
is it just an interesting story?
Hmm.
Or do you really have a point to this? And what is the point?
Hmm.
Does he really think this is what the world is all about, that you're going to be in this afterlife and pick another soul? And I don't know, it just seemed like it, I don't know, it just seemed like it didn't fit with anything else in the entire book.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. This is how he ends the whole work. I figure we should at least recap here. He says, and so, my dear Glaucon, his tail was preserved from perishing, and if we remember it, may well preserve us in turn. We shall cross the river of Lethe safely, and shall not defile our souls. This, at any rate, is my advice, that we should believe the soul to be immortal, capable of enduring all evil and all good, and always keep our feet on the upward way and pursue justice with wisdom. So we should be at peace with the gods and with ourselves, both in our life here and when, like the victors in the games collecting their prizes, we receive our reward. And both in this life and in the 1,000-year journey which I have described, all will be well with us. And that's how he ends. That's how he ends the Republic.
Yeah.
Interesting. What'd you think of the
No,
book as a whole?
you should go first. Why do I always have to go first?
I mean, I enjoy reading it. I mentioned I've read it before. I think it is. I mean, I think it is one of the most important things just to have read, sort of in the sort of Western canon, right? It's inspired so many other works. You should have an understanding of what's discussed in the Republic if you want to do anything in education, academia in any capacity. You should have some understanding of this. I think he's wrong on many counts in all the places we've described, but I do also think that he provides good questions, right? Like
Mhm.
we've said many times, he presents things really, really well in sort of broad strokes, right? And asking, what does it mean to be just? What does it mean to live an ordered life, right? Those questions that he's asking are excellent. And he comes up with some good general answers, but always in the specifics, it gets really, really weird. This kind of totalitarian state, depending on how serious he is about the state or whether it is just this analogy for the soul. Either way, like his specifics don't necessarily hold up. But I do think it is easy to see why this has inspired so many other things, why this is sort of the cornerstone of, Western philosophy in some way, right? Whether it's political philosophy or sort of metaphysics or, theories of art and beauty and stuff like that. He's touching on so many different things in this book. There's so many places to respond to in whatever field that you're interested in. So I think it makes sense, why it is such an important book and why it is good to read it.
I agree with everything you said.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, no, I do. I do. I think it's well said. A great articulation of the value of the book.
Hmm.
And I'm really glad you selected it. I had to
Yeah.
force myself at the beginning to get into it. But I'm glad we did, because it reminded me of two things. One, it's an interesting read.
Hmm.
It brings up all these topics, and I like discussing them with you. Um, but it also made me feel better about myself, which is important.
Of course.
Because I read it in my 20s when I was like your age or younger, and I hated it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I really, really hated it. But I couldn't really exactly remember why. It's been
And,
so long.
and now you remember
And
it.
now I remember, and I don't hate it as much,
Hmm.
but I don't hate anything as much as I used to.
Yeah.
It's one of the benefits and the detriments of getting old. The benefit is, you don't have those passions, as Socrates would say,
Right. Right.
moderated. But then you don't have the benefit of the passions. as a great philosophy group, Rage Against the Machine,
Mm,
once, anger is a gift.
mm.
And it was to me for many, many years. And I have a harder and harder time getting angry. And, and that's good,
Yeah, yeah.
um, except for in traffic. And I'm getting better,
Oh, that's
getting
good.
better.
That's
My little
good.
Jesus statues help me out. It's a constant reminder, patience.
Hmm.
They're not purposely delaying you. It's just all inadvertent. Any event, so yeah, I really enjoyed it, and we have to figure out what we're going to
Yeah,
do next time. And like you said, I think it's something everybody should read. If you're going to have a college degree, it should be required reading,
yeah,
if not high school,
yeah,
because why not? You know,
yeah.
it's available. The book's cheap. I mean, what do we
Hmm.
pay, like $15 for the paperback?
Yeah,
Maybe, you know, that's just for the cost of, yeah, 13,
yeah.
13, and we probably paid less on Amazon, and it's delivered to your house.
Hmm.
So yeah, absolutely, you know, read it, and there's, you know, some works. It's really kind of just a work of literature, if nothing else.
Yeah,
You know, you should be able to be familiar with it,
yeah,
so you can have intelligent discussions with other people who are well read. There's just to be certain universal knowledge that we should all have, and so few of us do anymore.
yeah.
So I'm glad you selected it, and I enjoyed talking about it.
No, well, that's great. No,
Yes.
I thought it was fun. I think we had some good conversations this season. But it's your pick for the book for next season. I don't know what you were thinking.
Well, I am considering. Well, I'm either going to read it on my own
Mm,
finally, or we should have it as the thing is the Rules for Radicals by
mm,
Saul. And I think it's real. It's been timely for about what 30 years,
yeah,
because it really talks about political theory, and it talks about you know, how to advance a political cause, and it's also I think it does explain you know, why people are doing what they're doing,
yeah.
and why it's effective. And we can see you can see these kind of efforts to manipulate the public.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think, um, you know, I've read the first chapter a couple different times, and I just never got past it. Or maybe it's the prologue or whatever, the
Hmm.
intro. It's a short book.
Yeah,
So if you're willing to do that,
yeah.
I think that would be interesting, um, because we'd have a lot to agree with, I think, and we'd
Hmm.
have he's such a um, uh, you know, he's not religious at all. You
Right,
know, atheist probably, I think, and it's all about power. You know,
right.
it's a fascinating outlook on life and the value
Hmm.
of your actions when you have really no ethics.
Right,
You
right.
know,
Yeah,
how do you have values but no ethics? And so I think I think it's such an interesting topic.
yeah.
Um, so that's my
Yeah.
thought, but
All
I
right.
can come up with something else. I want to touch on something along those lines where, you know, either that or like something from Hitchens,
Hmm.
something that's um, something we're going to both disagree with a
Yeah,
lot more than agree with. If that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. No, that's a good idea.
So I don't know if Hitchens, if he wrote a full length book about Mother Teresa or not.
Oh no.
That's like my most controversial take
Hmm.
in the world is, you know, maybe Mother Teresa wasn't a good person. and you just gotta be careful who you say that in front
Hmm.
of.
Hmm.
And and I'm not saying Mother Teresa was a bad person,
Yes.
but but what did she
Yeah.
actually do to help these people? These
Yeah.
poor, starving, suffering people, many of which had curable diseases.
I
I
think I've
didn't
got to cut you off
I didn't
before you
even
go on
believe
this
it.
full rant.
Because that Hitchens guy was great because he's an atheist, but he's so
Uh-huh.
articulate, like that English accent, and he's so erudite, and he's just and he's funny. And so I'd see debates, you know, replays on YouTube or whatever, and then I see this clip that he hates Mother Teresa. I mean, who hates the sainted mother? Literally now,
Yeah.
Mother Teresa. But you go down that rabbit hole and you start thinking, Oh my gosh, this guy might have a point.
Oh my gosh.
Makes you question everything, like Tucker Carlson.
Exactly.
I'm still,
Exactly.
I mean, I'm having doubts about that moon landing. If Mother Teresa's bad,
Yeah. Well, maybe that
what
that should
else,
be the
what else
book.
could be
It'll be a some crazy conspiracy theorist book about why the moon landing was fake.
true? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we don't have any proof though
No, that's right. That's right.
yet. Yet.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap things up for the last episode of season 13.
Oh, lucky number
Um,
15.
Lucky number 13, that's right. Well, I have been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
You can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions.